G'day legends, I hope you are having a wonderful day and so far you are having a great week. Of course, over the past couple of days we have had a lot of political news, especially with the US 28-point proposal to Ukraine, of course written up somewhat with Russia and really put forward to, hey Ukraine, this is where we want to go from the US. But of course we know Europe, they're not happy with that. And today they have had a counter proposal. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the proposal, look at my thoughts on it. We'll look at individual points. We'll also talk about the weighting of these proposals. How much is it weighted towards what Ukraine want or what Russia want through a points weighting system? I think you'll find that very interesting. Of course, we'll be looking at the maps and of course, maps being used at the front line and the danger that this can have. So of course, legends, a lot to go over. Let's start here on the maps. Here we have Ukraine, the center of the screen, the capital of Kyiv, red areas, occupied since 22, purple since 14, red check, of course, ground confirmed by this map by Ukraine, accepting that has been taken in the red check. Now, the first area we're going to come is down into this southern area that we can see developing a envelopment around Mariupol, Orokhiv, and in the direction of not only Pokrovsk, but also Zaporizhia. As we know, the linear warfare bros, 6 months till Zap, but it was 1,000 years only shortly ago, and this continues to move. No changes shown on this map today. But before I actually show you where the maps are changing, I wanted to look at this, and this is coming through from Ukrainian media. The enemy is behind us. We're almost in the bag. Of course, talking about a pocket, Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, Mariupol, a new critical point of the city, which the Russians have come very close. The defenders in Mariupol themselves admit this. At the same time, they demand reinforcements. If there are none, they say, well, it risks falling. But this is what I found very interesting in this, and I've had this translated using AI. There is no communication, not only with neighbouring units, but worst of all, not even between battalions. It is turning into simple anarchy. Nobody understands anything. We are like blind kittens. We understand where someone is advancing only by checking deep state. Now, this is what I've been saying. This is why deep state is not just content for NAFO bandits to beat off to together in their basements. It is very important that this is accurate because this is actually being used by those doing the job, those warriors, those brave enough to be there on the front line. This is why it is very important that this is accurate. But what we have said and seen is that this is typically sometimes 5 to 10 kilometers wrong, even in grey zone. The soldiers here, such poor communications, they're relying on this. So what we're going to look at is in this exact area, what they are speaking about. So let's look on the Syriac maps. Russian army took full control of the localities of Drane, Tikhi, and recaptured the village of Hay. Okay, let me show you where these are. So it's in this Pokrovsky direction here. So this is Vradrane right in here. This is Tikhi right in here. And then Hay is sitting just where my cursor is. The labeling isn't fantastic. But as you can see, this is well outside of the grey zone. What we know is guys in this direction are relying on this map here. Now, could this just be Syriac having propaganda? Well, let me show you this. Here we have geolocations. There are actually 2 flags geolocated in this. To Tekhe right here, 10.5 kilometers behind the front line. We have Russian forces here, well outside of even the closest grey zone. We're talking, what, probably some 5 Ks back to here, 4.73. So you could be hanging out with the boys having a cup of tea thinking, well, there's no way they're even close to this. Then we see where the geolocation lies. Tells us a vastly different story. That's why it's critical that, yes, okay, there's an element of propaganda, the boys in the basement, you know, changing their geolocation to try and change where their Twitter is now. But at the end of the day, people who are actually fighting the fight are reliant on this. Okay, let's keep moving. Let's come down in our next map update is around Orokhiv, Mala, Tokmachka front, where we did see, of course, that armoured movement, but now Surak is saying then up the guts into Orokhiv that the Russian army has had further attempts in here into this southern outskirts. So we're talking, of course, we have Orokhiv and this Novodelnivka up into this area here. Remember, from my experience within Orokhiv, when we were still under fighting, we heard small arms. I was in here that we were told the Russians were a kilometre from the rail, so somewhat out in here at some point in 22. So this never showed up to that advance, but also then advancing and putting pressure on more of these areas. And then we come to the west of here where the Stepnohursk island boys are, and we see Suryak maps on this front. Over the past 2 weeks, Russian army's continuous operations to take Stepnohursk, carrying out some successful encircling. The Ukrainian army continues to maintain control over the locality. In addition, Ukrainian forces managed to regain lost grounds in Primorsk, so in this sector right here, pushing that back. Right, before we get into the politics, let's have a quick look up and down the maps in some other areas. Pokrovsk. Okay, let's have a look here. We have red check in the center of Pokrovsk, red check around Lysivka, where that pocket is closing the bottom of the pocket. Very dangerous. But also you want to keep the troops engaged in here to squeeze the tops of the pocket, therefore increase your attritional rate. But many things aren't saying the same. So we have United 24 Media, funded by Zelensky. Ukrainian forces have cleared the centre of Pokrovsk and are conducting search and strike operations to eliminate remaining Russian troops of the already gazillion that have been killed in here. So they continue to hold positions and they've cleared Pokrovsk. They've cleared the centre of Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, Mr. AMK is saying on the 22nd, Russian forces, that they have fully captured the city of Pokrovsk. One of these things is not like the other. Let's have a look at Mr. Suryak map. Of course, it's showing this squeeze of the tunnel that is occurring, but also movement into Minograd, movement out of Krasny Yar and Lysivka area, further building on that base and squeezing into Minograd. Day by day, we see that stepping forwards. Let's look on the northern side. Shakhovka Island boys here as well. On this front, in the last 2 days, the Russian army took control over most of Shakhovka with combing operations through this locality. So controlling, he's saying, Shakhovka area. Okay, let's keep moving. We'll look, Chasiv Yar, Bakhmut, step to the north, we see Vusi-Kivka in this area. Of course, this is on the southern side of Seversk. Remember, front lines are not mutually exclusive. War is very holistic, especially war like this. It all feeds into itself. On this front, we call Solidar front. The last 3 weeks, the Russian army captured Vasilivka. As a result of the positional battles, in addition, the last 2 days, launched new operations toward Pezeno. Despite reaching the outskirts, they've surpassed trench systems and battles on the outskirts continue to premature by consolidation there. So, further movement up in, this might be Prezeno right here. Either way, he's saying this area as well, but there is movement. We've stepped through Seversk, stepped through Yampil. We know that sector up through then Borova. And where is my final map? We're talking about Stavki. Apologies, my mind wasn't working. Here we have Stavki Kolodayaze. This is Stavki right here. Continued increasing control around Stavki, capture of the western warehouse and a series of trenches. So saying that area is now coming under control. But as you can see from the maps, from the geolocations, yesterday we had 7 kilometres. The day before we had 9 kilometres. Today we have 10.5 kilometres. You can see that things are speeding up in the wrong direction. And what I ask is please, 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 can someone check on the linear warfare bros when we take these actual locations into here about Zaporizhia or other more critical areas? I'm not saying it's going to be faster. I'm saying the war just doesn't move on like a linear trajectory like people will say. Okay, so what we're going to do is my numbering here is actually a little bit off from how I want to do this. I had a thought about it just then. I'm guessing you guys have been through the points on the plan. Now, we will do that, but firstly, I'll go through what I think of it in case you've read through the plan. I'll save you a little bit of time. Now, there was massive speculation that this was a Russian-built plan, Russian-written plan that the US just agreed to. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, he's pushed back and said the peace proposal was authored by the US. It is offered as a strong framework for ongoing negotiations. It is based on input from the Russian side, but it is also based on previous and ongoing input from Ukraine. So it was authored by them, pushing back on that. And the Polish Prime Minister, he's also thrown some speculation on this too. Leaders of Europe, Canada, Japan, we have declared our readiness to work on the 28-point plan, despite some reservations. However, before we start work, it would be good to know for sure who is the author of the plan and where it was created. And Marco Rubio said this 19 hours ago. This was then 12 hours ago. I screenshotted these basically at the exact same time. What I will say, regardless of who the author is, it'll be written on the battlefield. The author of war is written by the sword, not the pen. And again, will reflect the battlefield when push comes to shove. Now, let's look at this peace weighting. Actually, I've messed up all the way of which I'm going to do these slides, but I think this will be better. Before we go through the full text here, now I've had some assistance with AI in this of exactly which is the best way to have a scale for this. So our weighting scale is strategic gain is 3 points, operational gain 2, political or economic gain is 1 point, and then we have ones also that are 0 for neutral, of which it doesn't affect one more positively than the other. It may be good for both, it may be bad for both, same level. But we see strategic gain overall, way more important than operational, more important than political economic. For an example here, in point number 7, which we'll go over, is NATO membership based on consensus of NATO members in the European plan. Therefore, this is 3 points to Ukraine because that is massive strategic gain. In 13C, Russia back in the G8, we give 1 point to or minus 1 point from the Russians here because it's mainly symbolic and it's reversible too. Now, again, you can disagree with this scaling, this weighting, but that's how I see it. So using this scale before we step into it, the European plan went through Ukraine, Western gains, we see a plus 26. So adding up all of this, we see the weighting that there's 26 points there. Some are 1s, some are 3s. For the Russian, then negative here, but for their gain, so negative is good for the Russians, we see that as a minus 4. So the net score is it's geared 22 points towards Ukraine. This is a very large advantage that this is far more acceptable to Ukraine and the West in this plan using this weighting. Again, you can go through the plan too and add your own points if you would like and get an idea. For the US plan, okay, I had plus 16 for Ukraine, minus 21 for Russia. So the net score was minus 5, being a slight advantage for Russia. Okay, that's just how I weighted these plans. Again, you can go back and look at the full wording of the US plan, full wording of the European plan, use this scale and see maybe where you agree or disagree with myself. Okay, before we go through is, firstly, imagine if Ukraine signed a security deal with China to watch how Brussels and Moscow crack the SADs and maybe have a double-end bloody invasion then. But once again, Europe has shot down any chances of a deal that accurately reflects the realities of war, the balances of power. They've shot it down. The level of delusion, idiocy, and self-inflicted blindness is staggering, especially with states that literally wrote the book on this type of power diplomacy and have ended many wars on these ways as well. They've just shown, as Kaja Kallas says openly, that their primary goal is to weaken Russia, that they're happy to be done at the expense of any hope for a future of Ukraine. They're happy to shoot down that as long as it weakens Russia. Because the survival of Ukraine is not existential for Europe. Russia, potentially, they say, is existential for the survival of Europe if they continue on the trajectory of wanting to sweep across, which we have shot down and said this is just not realistic. What is existential for these leaders is not Russia militarily. It's that they have based their credibility, their ideology, all of this on Ukraine having a victory. How Europe and Ukraine believe that they are the ones who will be dictating the terms is remarkably just out of touch, that's why I showed you the weighting. As Mr. Big Surge says, the battlefield has a reality of its own that is existentially prior to negotiations. Diplomacy in this context does not serve to transact a fair or balanced peace, but rather to codify the reality of the military calculus. And again, so we can see the weighting in my system here. This plan that I'll present to you, this is a wish list. And even the use of a term like ceasefire in this just shows the fucking ignorance. The virus of relative reality that has infected European leaders and institutions while they're invaded and destroyed and eroding from within. It just shows how a lot of people in the analytical space and these leaders, they just don't understand the first step fundamentals, the first day shit of war. Firstly, that war is politics, that war is a tool of politics. It's not just, it's not clean, it's not fair, but war is a tool of politics. You don't understand that first fundamental. And secondly, why Russia has fought this war. Because you get why war is used, why they're using war as a tool of diplomacy. And if you don't understand these fundamentals, you will not understand it. It doesn't mean that you think it's just, doesn't mean you think it's moral or right or ethical or any of that. But if you don't understand that, you'll fail to understand everything else. And I think these people honestly just believe that Putin is a crazed old man sitting in the Kremlin who's just done this on a whim. Without understanding day one fundamentals, it does look like that. But if you don't understand these fundamentals, you have no hope when it's time to face the music and face reality. This plan, in it, has possible entry to NATO. No recognition of territory. No caps on the size of military or larger caps on the size of mil. Has Russia paying hundreds of billions or trillions into reparations, which I always laugh at when Europe talks about reparations, or anyone talks about reparations, looking at you, England, US, etc. There's no blanket lifting of sanctions, so we look at everyone individually. So once this is laughed out of the room, I think it's likely as well, when we come back to the table, even if we start on the idea of territorial swaps of the line of contact, well, this may age very poorly. If you want territory swap, what are you swapping? But at the line of contact, it's likely going to be significantly worse in 6 or 12 months, even if you're a linear warfare bro. Don't worry, guys. ZAP is only 6 months away. This honestly reads like something written by people who have not looked at a frontline map in a year and do not understand the metrics, the reality of a traditional war. Looking at the general staff map yesterday of Pokrovsk, maybe that's what these leaders are being shown. Russia has momentum, Ukraine is running out of men, and Western support is fracturing. That is the harsh, brutal reality of this. Yet Brussels, they still act like they can dictate terms from a position of strength. What Ukraine can realistically get now through something like the US or other plans is survival, not victory. People say, well, let's just pour in more money. Okay, then free up $1 trillion, pour it in. What are you spending the $1 trillion on? Okay, that is going to make an impact in the amount of time that will be survival. Negotiations do not create reality. Negotiations, they formalize it, as per what Big Surge says. And the battlefield, this has already done the writing. It's a painful settlement is still a state. Chasing fantasies will lead to one outcome, that collapse. We talk about the bankruptcy theory with attritional war. Reality does not bend to what Europe wishes to be true. It bends to whoever still can fight. And we've seen that there's no appetite to fund in tens or hundreds of billions or more dollars or European soldiers into this either. There's a wish list that is more out of touch with mine for Christmas. Mr. LM, he says, I disagree with you, Matt. You are right, the EU proposal still doesn't respond to Russia's primary concern, okay, NATO membership. But 1 year ago, these guys were asking Russia to capitulate and Putin to turn himself into The Hague. Now they're accepting the fact Russia will hold large chunks of Ukraine, i.e. the territorial swap. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant item actually accepts the final border will be close to Dnipro. Give up NATO and drop the Russian fund part. This would be a good starting position to start working. So if you take some of this, as far as the frozen assets it's talked about in this, as well as NATO, maybe it is. But in short, the EU is shifting position much faster than the linear warfare bros. And this is something that we have seen very, very slowly, but it has crept, becoming more an acceptable position that Russia is going to walk away with something here that, yes, a year ago or something, we saw nothing but $1 trillion in reparations from Russia, in NATO entry, EU entry, all this territory, 1991 border, blah, 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 Putin in The Hague, and now it is changing. And we have seen, and you and I noticed, that language has shifted over the past months also. Okay, so I'm trying to think of where we go next. Let's look at what Trump has tweeted. This, by the time you're seeing this, will be approximately 15 hours old. The war between Russia and Ukraine is a violent and terrible one. With strong, proper US-Ukrainian leadership would never have happened. So US and Ukrainian leadership never would have happened. If the 2020 presidential election wasn't rigged and stolen, there would be no war. Remember, whether you think this was stolen or not, with the Russiagate thing, like with Russiagate in Romania or in France or this or that is occurring, therefore, it makes ability for leaders to actually have any relationship or talk with Russia, like Trump, it takes away any ability to do this, and science makes things, of course, worse. He says, I inherited a war. Well, that's what you get. You inherit everything when you become the leader. This is now your war. You can't just keep pushing it across. But he goes, there's millions of people have needlessly died. Don't listen to any of Trump's numbers. But Ukraine's leadership has expressed zero gratitude for our efforts, and Europe continues to buy oil from Russia. Of course, we saw Zelensky push back on this, saying that it's either our dignity or the loss of a partner. And we know Europe is continuing to buy massive amounts of energy products from Russia, or the product is from Russia, but it's coming through an intermediary. But US, where's uranium coming from? The US continues to sell massive amounts of weapons to NATO for distribution to Ukraine. Crooked Joe gave everything for free, including big money. God bless all the lives that have been lost in this catastrophe. And I agree with the last part about it. God bless the lives who have been lost here. But you see, they're expressing zero gratitude for the efforts. And we see Trump is on the roller coaster of our guy, Russian shill. Our guy, Russian shill. Give it a week, he'll be back on good terms. So what is Russia saying about this? Well, Russian media, they're calling this stillborn. This gentleman here is saying EU versus US. The EU is sabotaging negotiations with its peace deal. Trump's 28 points, the Europeans 24 of their own. I'll not list them all. You just need to look at a few to understand the plan is stillborn. We're going to go over that next. They will just set out conditions that are unacceptable from the start, which naturally will reject. They accuse us of not wanting peace. We've seen this before. And again, this is a point on poison pill diplomacy as well. You present something that you're never going to accept. Therefore, you can shift it on. And we've seen this again and again and again used, more so actually used from Europe towards Russia than the other way, with negotiations, with ceasefires, blah, 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 that it's never acceptable, then they don't want peace. But again, this is what I believe that the Kremlin is doing too. I don't believe that even the US 28 plan, that it appears that the Russians have agreed to, at least ostensibly appears that way. But I think it's poison pill knowing that Ukraine, Zelensky can't accept that, at least with maintaining the way he's living at the moment, and therefore will shoot it down and swing the US out. They're trying to amend Trump's plan for Ukraine to make it unacceptable. It's perfect hostility in Europe. That's the way that was received. Trump's plan posed a threat to their world order. It turns out that Russia too can defend its interests. Now, regardless of how this goes, I think the US-Russian relationship we will see grow in the next coming months. Now, I don't see this proposal as bad for Russia strategically when they shoot it down. I don't see that being bad that way. What it will show the US is it will show that Europe is not serious. So by toning this down, I don't think it's going to have any strategic impact, but it will show that Europe is not serious to Trump. Therefore, Russia's poison pill with the US, EU not willing to see and work within the reality could result further in the US walking away. If the US comes and goes, look, we had this that seems reasonable as per the weighting, matches actually probably not in Russia's favour enough given the weighting of how the battlefield sits compared to this, but okay, sits maybe closer to the reality of the battlefield. We had this, it was shot down over here, you came with this here, and then it's showing you, yeah, they've shot it down, but it was never realistic. I think it will reflect worse on Europe and Ukraine than it will Russia strategically to the US. That's at least how I would be reading that. And again, that poison pill of which we've spoken about, of that the Kremlin's entertaining these ideas, the US idea, because it knows Ukraine and Europe will never accept it. If US support drops, I don't care what David D says. It is catastrophically, almost instantly here. I know there's lots of people tweeting and going, Europe will backfill the intelligence. It's not how it works, okay? It can't work that quickly. But Trump, of course, was saying there's no gratitude here. Well, Rubio, he's saying there's tremendous progress, that it's a very optimistic, a very good day. Before, Zelensky said his country could face losing dignity or support. Trump saying zero gratitude. Zelensky posting on social media was slightly more guarded, welcoming and reinvigorated diplomacy and saying there were signals Trump's team is hearing us. So what is actually in this plan? This is from Reuters, the full text of the European counter-proposal to US-Ukraine peace plan. Drafted by the E3 powers, Britain, France, Germany. Takes the US plan as its basis and then goes through point by point, suggests changes and deletions. So number one, which is pretty opaque, is Ukraine's sovereignty to be reconfirmed. Two, there'll be a total and complete non-aggression agreement reached between Russia and Ukraine and NATO. All ambiguities for the past 30 years resolved. So again, US plan. Point three is deleted. A draft of that plan, seen by Reuters, said there will be an expectation that Russia will not invade its neighbours and NATO will not expand further. So then this is deleted. May as well turn off the camera and fucking stop here. Okay, as long as that's there, the fighting will continue. 4. After a peace agreement is signed, a dialogue between Russia and NATO will convene to address all security concerns and create a de-escalatory environment to ensure global security and increase the opportunity for connectivity and future economic opportunity. So, more money going in. Ukraine will receive robust security guarantees. But, in number 4 here, global security, increased opportunity, blah, blah, blah. What I'll say is Russia has zero faith that their security concerns would be taken seriously. Remember, due to, and whether you believe the concern is legitimate or not, is beyond the point. They felt it was large enough that they had to resort to war as the tool of diplomacy because it couldn't be done in any other way. So again, saying that you're going to see our security concerns with deletion of this, it's a non-starter. Size of Ukraine's military capped at 800,000. Now, these are completely unrealistic numbers unless Ukraine turns into North Korea. Ukraine is significantly poorer than Australia, probably has similar population numbers currently, could be worse. You cannot maintain an army of 800,000 with that level of population or economy. You can't maintain, not even close to that while running a functioning state. Ukraine joining NATO depends on consensus of NATO members, which does not exist. So they're saying there's no consensus. But if there was consensus, then they could be in. Again, non-starter. So it still leaves it on the table. That's why that is like 3 points in my weighting. 8. NATO agrees to permanently station troops under... No, NATO agrees not to permanently station troops under its command in Ukraine in peacetime. Number 8 will be another non-starter, because there could be a deployment of troops on a non-NATO force, or it could be temporary, that it's not permanent, they're just here for the next 20 years, and no, they're part of a European force. As EU becomes more militarised than NATO, we see Turkey working outside of NATO all the time. We're not NATO here, but we are NATO here. 9. NATO fighter jets will be stationed in Poland. Okay, 10. US guarantees that mirror Article 5. Again, this would be 3 points towards Ukraine. So a guarantee mirrors Article 5. So therefore, it's de facto NATO. 10 Alpha, US to receive compensation for the guarantee. B, if Ukraine invades Russia, it forfeits the guarantee. This is the thing. What constitutes Russia, though? Is it occupied regions? If Ukraine then suddenly go, we're going back, does it forfeit the guarantee only when it crosses 91 border, or does it forfeit the guarantee if it crosses it on a Kyiv? C. If Russia invades Ukraine, in addition to a robust coordinated military response, all global sanctions will be restored and any kind of recognition for the new territory and all of the benefits of this agreement could be withdrawn, or will be withdrawn. So instantly there'll be military response, Article 5 light guarantee from number 10, and everything then back on the table. Again, this is number 3 points on my weighting. 11. Ukraine is eligible for EU membership and will get short-term preferred market access to Europe while this is being evaluated. So basically shoot into the EU with meeting none of the requirements. 12. Robust global redevelopment package for Ukraine, including but not limited to A, creation of Ukraine Development Fund to invest in high-growth industries, including tech, data centers, and AI efforts. Of course, the US will fucking love that because where's all the high-growth industries? Not in the EU. Look at companies that are worth, have a market cap over, $100 billion or $10 billion, whatever it is. They're all in the US. There's very few in Europe, and especially data, AI, high-growth. It's going to be in the US. Shitload of European money going in there. US need that at the moment because AI appears to be hanging on by a thread. It's just a circle jerk of dorks in Silicon Valley with not making any actual money. The US will partner with Ukraine to jointly secure, grow, modernize and operate Ukraine's gas infrastructure, which includes its pipeline and storage facilities. C, joint effort to redevelop areas impacted by the war to restore, redevelop, modernize cities and residential areas. Again, where is that? because the areas that have taken the most damage are all going to be within Russian-occupied territories. We'll be redeveloping those areas. Those people are still Ukrainian. This is the funny thing, is again and again and again, oh, good, this area got hit. Like, you know, the people who live in that area are still Ukrainian on that side. Will it be that? D, infrastructure development. E, mineral and natural resource extraction. US love that too. F, a special financing package will be developed in the World Bank to provide financing to accelerate these efforts. 13, Russia to progressively reintegrate into global economy. So again, this is like a -1, like a -1, I think, because it's progressively coming in. But again, it's conditional. A, sanction relief will be discussed and agreed upon in phases on a case-by-case basis. And like we've said, this is why we've put economic low here, is it's symbolic and very reversible. There's no guarantees on this. US will enter into long-term cooperation agreement to pursue mutual development in areas of energy, natural resource, infrastructure, AI, data centers, rare earth, joint projects in the Arctic. Very important. That's why I've talked about it for years, and all other areas of mutually beneficial corporate opportunities back opening up to Russia. C, Russia invited back to the G8. Again, that is reversible, symbolic. 14, Ukraine will be fully reconstructed and compensated financially. Does this include occupied areas? Including through Russian sovereign assets that will remain frozen until Russia compensates the damage in Ukraine. So we're going to continue holding that asset until you compensate here. Now, what is compensation? Who's coming up with this figure? Because does it go down to people losing their lives, people's trauma? Where does that actually start? Where is this? Is it for generations? Is it that? Is it people's kids? Is it people's this is just be a non-starter. Now, as well, should we start compensating countries of which we destroyed? Because I'm looking at the Middle East and I'm seeing what happened there. Doesn't seem like much of that. 15. A joint security task force will be established with the participation of US, Ukraine, Russia, and the Europeans to promote and enforce all provisions of this agreement. Russia will legislatively enshrine a non-aggression policy towards Europe and Ukraine. The US and Russia agree to extend nuclear non-proliferation. Ukraine agrees to remain a non-nuclear state. That'd never be anyway. The ZNPP will be restarted under supervision of the IAEA, and the produced power shall be shared equitably 50-50 between Russia and Ukraine. 20, Ukraine will adopt EU rules on religious tolerance and protection of linguistic minorities, but I thought there was none of that. Territories. 21. It's one of the most important parts. I don't believe that territory is as important as many are saying in levels of negotiation as well, especially when we see the outcomes of attritional war, but of course it is still one of the biggest points in here, but it's not as high as, say, NATO on the security. Ukraine commits not to recover its occupied sovereign territory through military means. Negotiations on territorial swaps can start from the line of contact. Okay then, well, this is what Kursk was for at one point. So what is being swapped? Is it all that's occupied in Kharkiv for Donbass? Is it whatever? Again, now that this is going to get shot down, like I said, is this going to get shot down in 6 months? This could look dramatically worse. Even if it's line of contact, the line of contact could be significantly different. 22. Once future territorial arrangements have been agreed, both the Russian Federation and Ukraine undertake not to change these arrangements by force. Any security guarantees will not apply if there is a breach of this obligation. 23. Russia shall not obstruct Ukraine's use of the Dnieper River for any commercial activities and shipment through the Black Sea. 24. A humanitarian committee will be established to resolve issues. Remaining prisoners, all for all, detainees will be returned. There will be a reunification program of family. Provisions will be made to address the suffering and victims of the conflict. Will this be provision in both sides of the aisle as well? Again, we don't know. We're never going to know because this is a non-starter. But Ukraine will hold elections as soon as possible after signing the peace agreement. Again, with everything out here, I think Ukrainians need some sort of election or plebiscite or something to get an idea. Because the ones making the decision on this is a few people in Kyiv. How do the people actually feel about this? This agreement will be legally binding. Its implementation will be monitored and guaranteed by a board of peace chaired by Trump. What happens when Trump goes out or dies or whatever? Penalties for violation. 28. Upon all sides agreeing to this memorandum, a ceasefire will be immediately effective upon both parties withdrawing to agreed points for the implementation of the agreement to begin. So we're talking ceasefire, not a peace agreement. Again, because ceasefire, just to reopen back up. Ceasefire modalities, including monitoring, will be agreed by both parties under US supervision. Again, through that, you can just see it does not accurately reflect or codify, ratify what we actually see as the realities of the war as people on my channel who are realists and who don't believe war is just or fair or this or that. But we understand why war is used, how it's used, and therefore a tool of politics, and that the Europeans have no fucking clue what this actually is looking like in here. Again, I think this weighting, even if you have different scores on this, I think you'll agree that the score for the European plan is heavily in Ukraine's favour, and the score for the US plan is more neutral-ish. The US plan, people were laughing and throw it out. The European plan, the Europeans act like that they can end the war themselves without involving Russia at this point. And they just can't do. Unless they want to change the balance of power, they're either going to need to free up multiple more years and hundreds of billions of dollars more, that's still going to take a very long time, or deploy forces in themselves, which obviously there's no actual appetite to do. So what are we left with? Simply, the war will be fought to the conclusion. We'll see other proposals come forward that are worse than this, as we've seen proposals before that were better than this. But a lot of people I speak to, experts in fields, they still believe that you need a physical border. And they're still saying the Dnieper River, in time, will be where it is. Anyway, legends. We'll continue with it as we see things unfold. Maybe we'll have an event which changes everything. Look after yourselves. Have a great day. And I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.